progress. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's Monday, but we
Yeah.
only have 6 left, so I always think of numbers. We can do this.
I'm off to a little bit of a slow start, but that's normal for me.
Well, and for morning, some people are not morning people. So,
No, I mean
uh,
for this semester.
oh, really? Oh, no, I think you're doing fine. Are you in speech too?
No, I already took speech.
Okay. So, what else are you taking?
I am taking business, intro to business, I
Oh,
think.
oh, okay. Well, that's a good
No.
variety.
No, I'm sorry. I'm taking comp two.
Oh, okay. So you're
I'm, s-
writing.
yeah.
Recording You have a little writing in here, but not, it's doable. I don't think once you get the essay about your Native American artist done, that's 5 paragraphs with 3 sources, and then you just take the information from the essay and put it in your Google Slides, and those you share with the class. And I'll show you examples, but it's usually pretty good assignments, and those are due June 18th. And
Yeah.
then your final project in here is a blog. And so if you've never done a blog, they're not a mystery. It takes like 10 minutes to build them, and then I'll show you some examples from those too. We've had really some nice ones lately. So it's like, oh, because I didn't want you guys to have to do another paper because you're getting papers everywhere. So it was like, okay, blogs are short. That's why they're called blogs. And then it shows some kind of process that you guys can do for art, for cooking, for painting, for beading, whatever you want to try to do. So, and we build those today, the shells for
Okay.
those project ones today. So you can start putting things together in them. Good morning, everybody. It's Monday, and we will get through this class. We don't have that many Mondays left. A week from now, it's Memorial Day. So you don't have that Monday. And then you have 4 in June and 2, I think, in July. So we are down to not many Mondays left, if you think of it that way. The agenda today, we're talking about the ancient Greeks. They are not boring. It's chapter 2 in your textbook about landmarks. There's lots of videos in the Google Classroom. There's great PowerPoints from other textbooks about the Greeks. Um, we talk about their theater. We specifically look at one play, and it's called Antigone. And their plays were not very long, but they put 3 together, 3 tragedies, and then they would show a comedy. We look at their amphitheater, and there's a picture of it. So they had 10,000 go to one play at one time. And so it's kind of like our Excel centers. I think our Bismarck Civic Center holds about 6,000 people. So the Greeks loved live theater, and they put together with their famous playwrights some authentic works that are still produced today. This spring, a local theater in Bismarck did the play Antigone. They didn't put them in Greek costumes. They made it contemporary because you can do that in today's world. So you can bring a Romeo and Juliet from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance into today's world. That's why the chapter is called Classicism. And it's because the ideas that were happening and being documented still relate to our world today. And so when people talk about the classics, they talk about the Greeks, they can talk about the Romans, um, the writers and artists of the Renaissance. When we do go back to the classics, it usually begins with the Greeks, with what they contributed. And so today we kind of talk about the definition of classicism. We go through a couple videos, couple PowerPoints. We're going to do a jam board. So if you've never done a jam board before, I worked them in my humanities last spring. I gave them just a short one. um, in one class, and it was about music. So they kind of had fun. And then down the road, and I don't know if we'll get to that chapter or not, we did a class period putting together a jam board. And it was great fun, and everyone has access to it. But I might throw that at you today, just a short one, so you can kind of see what you do on that Google app. It's, if you go to your Gmail and you go to the top right and you see those 9 squares and you click it, you'll see, it has all the Google apps. And then sometimes it says more, because there's quite a few Google apps there that are free. And that's where Jamboard exists. But yeah, we'll just do a real mini lesson on that. And what that topic will be once I present it and share that with you guys in Google Classroom. And they mentioned Confucius, who was a Chinese philosopher, and he had lots of sayings. And so we'll kind of go through the chapter today and see what some of those are. Then, and I told you, we may watch the play Antigone. In the past, I've read The Myth of Her Father and the taboos, because the Greeks liked that kind of information in their plays about right versus wrong, taboos. They were also very funny in their comedies. But the myth of Oedipus is very complicated. It's 2 pages. I normally just read it out loud in class. And then we watch the first scene of the play. So we learn about her. Antigone is a woman. She is a sister. She is a daughter. And the storyline unfolds quickly with what happens to her because of a question that is posed to her, and she has to do what she has to do. And so in the past, I usually ask the question in a poll, whether you would do this like Antigone does or whether you wouldn't. And it's anonymous. I usually would have little sticky notes in classrooms and say, would you do this? And, every class is different. And some students would do what she was doing, and some students would go, And then before you head out today, your Native American Project 1, we will go through and we will build the documents and post them. And I'll go through what that midterm project is. You hear the word midterm and you all get a little crazy. I know as a student, I always did like, oh God, work. But I have posted the artists that students have written about in the past. So as a teacher, I don't like duplicates. Um, there's enough sharing in the world, so it's nice to either do an artist you may know personally, and then there are great resources, and I've posted a couple links there. But the project will entail a 2-page paper, 3 references, and then a 12-slide PowerPoint Google slide presentation that you'll share in class. But if you post them all in Google Classroom, then we have no problems. And I'll show you examples, but I do want to make the shells today so that if some of you want to get started on putting your midterm work, you want to get a head start on it, that's cool. Because those 2 will be due June 18th, which seems like a long time away from today, but it really truly isn't. Next Monday's May 31st, my birthday. And so the day after is June 1st. And so then you have 17 days left to get that midterm project done. So I like to kind of move and shake on that one so students can work when they've got open pockets of time. So today we talk about the Greeks, we define classicism, we watch some videos and some PowerPoints about what the Greeks contributed. We take a strong look at the outdoor amphitheater and realize 2 people didn't go to these shows. It was like 10,000. If you ever saw the movie Gladiator, it was 10,000 people in the Roman Colosseum. And the
Awesome.
Romans stole that type of architecture from the Greeks. Then I'll read the Myth of Oedipus so you see how complicated each of the myths were, but very important for their plays and future stories. Um, and then
That's what
we'll,
I'm writing about. Excuse me, I'm writing about Oedipus, and I'm trying to figure out why he was a hero. Because he really,
uh,
I mean, it's like he said though, it's really complicated.
yes, and I, the Greeks loved heroes. Um, he did do some good things. He did heroic things. But when I read the myth today and you find out what else he did,
Oh,
you may be disgusted. And
right,
so do our heroes disgust us? You know? So, and that's what the Greeks want you to think about. They don't want me to say, this is what you need to know about Oedipus, or you decide, or I tell you how to decide. The Greeks put the question out there to you guys, and you think about it. And that's what's so great about what they've contributed is that they don't force you to see just one way about an issue. And so when we learn about the myth of Oedipus, um, and you'll hear about it in general psych classes, because in the taboo of incest, which he committed,
right.
um, you hear about the Oedipal complex, okay? And that's a mother's son having sexual relations. And then in psychology, you'll hear about the Electra complex. And that is also built on Greek myths and plays. And that's about the character Electra, who, with her father, had incestual relations. And so the Greeks throw the stories out, and some are very soap opera-ish. They're, drama, drama, drama in today's world where everyone goes, oh God, I got to go to class. Oh God, she's going to talk. Well, yeah, I have to talk once in a while. But today with the Greeks, it's not dull. So if you think, oh, yawn, 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 this is going to be tough. No, the Greeks are so interesting, they're almost jaw dropping. And so to get going, at the beginning of chapter 2 on page 33, I'm just going to read the first couple paragraphs because they kind of tell you what classicism is. When you think of a classic car or classic rock, why do they put that word classic by it? So the Greek legacy is about 1200 to 30 BC. It didn't last a long time. When we call something a classic, whether it be a car, a film, or a novel, we mean that it is recognized as first ranking or the best of its kind. A classic outlives the time in which it was created and sets the standard for future achievement. The civilization of ancient Greece produced classics in almost every stinking genre of creative expression: literature, philosophy, music, the visual arts, and architecture. These classics advance the aesthetic principles of clarity, simplicity, and balance, regularity, and harmonious proportion. As a style, classicism is characterized by these principles and by related ideals of reason, moderation, and dignity. That is a lot of stuff.
A lot.
It's a lot. And so when we think of classicism in the scheme of the humanities, down the road in future chapters, that word's going to bite you in the butt. It's going to come back. And it's not going to haunt you. It's just that if you kind of get an idea of what the Greeks contributed, you will see how it threads through other times in other civilizations, in other places in the world, who also contributed. But the Greeks are pretty famous. And so If you take a look, the Parthenon is on page 32, but I did want to read that first paragraph because it really does give us a glimpse of what is going on in Greece. And so let's go to the View the Greeks from Khan Academy, and then we'll do a little discussion after it.
If I may ask a question.
Yep.
Why is it classism? Because at this point in time, I'm sure there were other societies that were just as important.
Oh, and there were. It was going on in civilizations were brewing in China, in
Right. Yeah.
India, South
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
everywhere, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a basic general humanities class, they start with the Greeks. Well, this book started with ancient civilizations,
Right.
Middle East, India, China, because we have the artifacts. But they always kind of then get into the Greeks for just a regular intro to humanities class.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, because as you go in your college road, you'll have other options for other humanities classes that discuss other civilizations.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's really truly their contributions. So that's a good question, especially at the beginning of a class. Let's see if this one works. I don't know if I want that one yet. I'm going to start with something new. Okay, here we go. This is kind of a good video of the overview of chapter 2.
Can't hear the video.
No.
I'll copy the link and put it in the chat then. Otherwise, it is in Google Classroom. Let's see. There you go.
So we watch it and come back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's only one video on that?
11 minutes. Yep.
Okay. See you in a bit.
I am now going to give an overview of ancient Greece. In future videos, we're going to go into a lot more depth on a lot of these events and ideas, but this one is to give you context on the big picture. And just to start, let's begin with the name Greece. It turns out that the Greeks do not call where they live Greece, neither did the ancient Greeks. They called it Hellas. 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 And the word Hellas comes from Ellen. So this comes from Ellen, which is this legendary figure who is viewed as a progenitor of the Greek people. You can kind of view him as the father of the Greek people. And it's not well established in the historical record when Ellen actually existed. But this is where we get the name Hellas from. And it's very important. Do not confuse this Ellen, who was a man, with Helen of Troy. Helen of Troy was a different person. When I was a child and I heard about Hellenic things or the Hellenic period or the Hellenes, I was like, oh, maybe that's something to do with Helen of Troy. No, that's referring to the Greek progenitor Ellen. And so that's where the word Hellas comes from, and ideas like Hellenes, which is the Greek people, or Hellenic, which is referring to something that is Greek, or the Hellenistic period, which we'll talk about many videos from now, which is this period of Greek influence, not just over Greece and the Anatolian Peninsula, but over Persia and over Egypt. So with that out of the way, let's now talk about the big arc of history of ancient Greece. And it's believed that the Greek peninsula has been settled by human beings for thousands and thousands of years. And as time goes on, we'll hopefully understand more and more about them. But my timeline right over here starts with Mycenaean Greece, it starts with the end of Mycenaean Greece. In other videos, we might talk more about the Mycenaean Empire. And as that empire falls, we enter into the Greek Dark Ages. And the reason why it's called the Dark Ages is there's not a lot of historical record of this period, roughly between 1100 BCE and 800 BCE. Now there's one event, and I'll kind of say that with a slight emphasis or a question, that is worth noting here. I have Trojan War ? Around 1200 BCE. Once again, there's not a strong historic record for the Trojan War, but it is a famous war that was chronicled by Homer. And even Homer, we don't know if he really existed or whether he was an entire literary tradition, but it was chronicled in the Iliad and the aftermath in the Odyssey. And once again, this was chronicled many hundreds of years later, and even Homer is a semi-legendary figure. But when people talk about the Trojan Wars or you see movies about it, we're talking about something that, if it happened the way it happened, it's on the order of 1200 BCE. Now, as we exit the Greek Dark Ages, that's when we start to have some of the institutions that we now identify with the ancient Greeks get established. You have the Oracle at Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi, often known, or Pythia, often known as the Oracle of Delphi. This is where leaders of the Greek city-states went for direction, to understand what was likely to happen, to get prophecies. And this institution, the Oracle at Delphi, lasts through this entire period I have on my timeline into Roman rule for over 1,000 years, where the Oracle of Delphi is a very, very prominent figure in influencing Greek leaders. At around the same time, you also have the Olympic Games, where they are held at Olympia, where people compete to show their athletic prowess. And this ancient Olympic Games, once again, it continues on for over 1,000 years. Our modern Olympics are, just kind of a flash in the pan, which I know was obviously modeled after the ancient Olympics, compared to how long this lasted. Now, when most people think of Greece, they're actually talking about classical Greece. So this is the classical period right over here. We're going to do videos on a lot of these events, but it's roughly the period between the Persian invasions that were successfully put off and the rise of Alexander and the fall of Alexander. And that's where you have all of these ideas of Greek democracy really kind of coming to the surface. Pericles, the strategos of Athens, who had the influence to really help democracy flourish, under his leadership or during his leadership, you have the Acropolis and the Parthenon, these famous icons of Greek culture being established. But once again, this is in this period. That's in this period right over here. This is also the period that we associate with the famous Greek philosophers. These lines right over here are the lives of Socrates and Plato, who's Socrates' student, established the famous academy. Aristotle, who was Plato's student and famous tutor of Alexander the Great. Now, as I mentioned, you had these city-states, and the ones that are worth mentioning, or all of them are worth mentioning, but I have in this diagram the most significant city-states of ancient Greece that you'll hear a lot about. We talked about the Oracle at Delphi, the Olympic Games at Olympia. A lot of the conversation tends to focus around Sparta and around Athens. And then you'll also hear a lot about Corinth and Thebes. Sparta is famous for its militaristic society. It's often glorified, but it's also worth noting that they were significant slave owners at different parts in Spartan history. They had somewhere between 7 and 20 slaves for every Spartan. Athens is famous for its philosophy. It's famous for its the birthplace of democracy. It's famous for its art. It's famous for its architecture. Actually, all of these areas are famous for its architecture. But it's also worth noting that during the Golden Age, and you have the Athenian Empire, they were also pretty brutal in putting down rebellion and in some ways subjugating different people. So it depends how you want to view things. And we're going to have a lot of videos on all of these things. But at that time, we talk about these city-states, even though they shared a common language and common culture, they went to the they sent folks to the Olympic Games, they went to the Oracle of Delphi, they were independent states. And it wasn't until you have Philip of Macedonia in the 4th century, right over here, where he starts to really unify these Greek city-states. And it culminates with his son, Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great not only unifies Greece, but he takes over the Persian Empire and really kind of, with his death, and he has a very short life, he ushers in the Hellenistic period where you have Greek culture influencing that entire region, not only Greece, not only what was the Persian Empire, the Middle East, Egypt. That whole region gets influenced by Greek culture. And Greece at the, I guess you could say at the end, finally gets under Roman control, and it depends which date you want to use it. In the middle of the 2nd century BCE is when Greece itself falls to Rome. But then other parts of, I guess you could say, the Hellenistic world finally succumb to Rome. For example, Ptolemaic Egypt in the 1st century BCE. But even then, even when it becomes part of the Roman Empire, it influences the Roman Empire very, very, very heavily. Now, other things that you will hear us talk about when we discuss the Greeks, besides the democracy and the philosophy, we're going to talk a lot about wars. And it's worth noting what Greek warriors look like. So this is a depiction of hoplites, which are Greek citizen soldiers in ancient Greece. And you'll also hear about a phalanx. A phalanx is the formation where they walked or they marched very tightly together. And when archers came, they would put all their shields up and they'd almost be like this armored tank. And it was a very effective method of warfare. Another word that you will hear associated with Sparta and those slaves is helots. Those were the names of those slaves, and they weren't owned by individuals. They were actually owned by the state. Now, some of the other cities here, Corinth will come up a lot. It has a very strategic location in the Isthmus of Corinth. Notice, to get from the mainland, or I guess into the Peloponnesian Peninsula, you have to go through this isthmus. Thebes right here was a significant rival to Athens at different periods of Greek history. It was the dominant city. Now, the last thing I want to mention is there's just a ton of culture that comes from the Greeks and a lot of words that we even use today. For example, the word draconian, which is used for something that's very harsh. Well, that comes from Draco's Law, which came in the 7th century BCE from Athens. He was an Athenian legislator who composed a very harsh series of laws, and that's where the word draconian comes from. When people say something is Spartan, they kind of imagine it's something that's very basic, or you just have the necessities. And it comes from the idea of Spartan culture, that they really, everything revolved around military necessity. Even the word laconic, which means someone who doesn't, says just enough to get their meaning across, it comes from the region where Sparta is, Laconia. The Spartans were famous for their kind of very terse speech. Famously, when Philip of Macedon was threatening the Spartans, and he's saying, if you don't come onto my side, I'm going to do this and that to you. If you don't become part of my kingdom, my empire, I'm going to do this to your city. I'm going to do that to your people. And the Spartans' famous reply was, if, which is kind of a good example of laconic speech. With that one word, they were able to convey a lot. So I'm going to leave you there. In the next few videos, we're going to go into some depth on this. But it's important to realize that when people talk about ancient Greece, they're talking about a large span of history. And most of what we associate with ancient Greece, the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the Persian Wars, the great Greek philosophers, most of that is associated with the classical period, often associated with the Golden Age, which is right around there. That well before this period, the Greeks weren't all, these philosophers sitting around in togas. They might have been wearing togas, but at these earlier periods, they were more.
Oops. Okay. So we kind of found a few things from that short video about just a good overview of classical Greece. And when I begin to read the Myth of Oedipus, you're going to hear some more of those terms that are Greek, so they started there. And so there aren't many, and you'll see them again. But one place, one temple that was really important for leaders was the oracle at Delphi. Now, Delphi is a location. It's in a city state, kind of like our counties in our states today. And, Sparta was a city state, Athens, and Delphi. Well, there was a temple at Delphi that really plays an important part in the myth of Oedipus. And it's where leaders would go and ask the gods and goddesses for truth about the future and what was going to be happening in their worlds. And so it's important, as he kind of glosses over some of these important terms, that you're going to see them again. They might be a term on a quiz for the Greeks. You will certainly know that the oracle at Delphi in the story about Oedipus today will be mentioned. He also meant,
So would
yes,
that be considered a church then?
kind of a temple, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And they believed in many gods and goddesses. It wasn't the mono, it wasn't just the one. There were lots of them they prayed to. And another word that he called out that we still have today are the Olympics.
Mhm.
And they began the Olympics in Greece. Many people participated. And it is something that has kind of had stops in history when there's been world wars, or plagues. And Japan this summer is hosting the Summer Olympics, but they're having a real hard time right now with COVID. And so you have some medical people saying, if we're going to have 10,000 people come over here from all over the world, how do we not spread the virus? And so it begins, I think, in July, but there's a lot of news right now coming out of Japan and what is occurring. And so the Greeks gave us the Olympics, and we're still having Olympics to the century. They also gave us a form of government. democracy. So to sum up that video, the really key terms that he gave us: democracy, where everyone has a voice or can have a voice, a vote, the ability to discuss and debate. He gave us, the Greeks gave us the Olympics. And the third one, to really kind of get into when we study now the Oedipus myth, is the oracle at Delphi. Church-like, temple-like, but leaders would go in there to ask questions if they had disease at their city state, or if they had drought, and so they would want to know the future, because the oracle it means truth telling about what's going to occur, and they would want to know. They would go ask the oracle at Delphi to get the truth. Okay. And so, this was firm in the Greeks' beliefs that the gods and goddesses could give them answers when the
So
world.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. So
yeah.
is this the oracle at Delphi? I'm still trying to piece all this together. Is the oracle who tells Oedipus's father about what's going to happen? Okay.
And his father is a king.
Right.
And so many people that were in leadership would go to the oracle at Delphi.
Mhm.
And when they found out something bad was going to happen, they would defy the gods and say, no, it's not. I'm going to take care of it. Well, if you are in Greek times and you defy the gods, good things are not going to happen to you. Which gets us into what we're going to talk about next, and that's the myth of Oedipus, the king.
I would like
So, and yeah, and they had tons of stories and mythology. There's a really short paperback. It's a couple hundred pages, but it's Edith Hamilton's mythology. And she's got a section just on the Greek gods and goddesses. They they were naughty, and they were naughty to each other, and they were naughty to humanity. And so if you ever are bored, those stories, they're not very lengthy. Um, that's why I kind of throw the myth of Oedipus out in humanities class, so you can see the characters and the drama and the complexity. And then after we read the myth this morning, we'll watch the beginning of the play that's about Oedipus's daughter. And her name, they wrote leads for women back then. Her name is Antigone. And so that's how it kind of all goes together. So I'm going to go into the classroom because I have a document in the classroom. So if you have the tab open.
Okay.
Yeah.
One question about the slaves. The Spartans had slaves, but the slaves were owned by the states. Who were these slaves? Where were they from?
All over.
Anyone that was not Greek.
Or anyone that socially, had no power socially. So they could be from actual Sparta.
Oh.
Okay. Now, can everybody see the 2-page myth of Oedipus that I have up here? I've shared it on my screen.
Yes.
Okay. This is taken from the book Edith Hamilton's Mythology. It's a short paperback, but it talks about gods and goddesses and the myths from various places. She has a section on the Greek myths, and she has a section on Roman. She has a section on the Norse myths. And this one is a story about King Oedipus, but it kind of gives you a background for then the play that we'll watch the first scene of. And the Greeks were very famous for their plays, because if you look in the chapter, you'll see the amphitheater that is huge, that seats 10,000 people. All right, And I'll just read this, kind of power read this so you get the background. I'm going to make it a little larger. Okay. Oedipus. I have taken this story entirely from Sophocles' play of that name, except for the riddle of the Sphinx, which Sophocles merely alludes to. It is given by many writers, always in the same form. King Laos, that's Oedipus's dad,
Mhm.
and he was from the city-state of Thebes, was third in descent from Cadmus. He married a distant cousin, Jocasta. With their reign, Apollo's oracle at Delphi began to play a leading part in the family's fortunes. Apollo was the god of truth. Whatever the priestess at Delphi said would happen infallibly came to pass. To attempt to act in such a way that the prophecy would be made void was futile, as to set oneself against the decrees of fate. Nevertheless, when the oracle warned Laos that he would die at the hands of his son, he determined that this should not be. When the child was born, he bound its feet together and had it exposed on a lonely mountain where it must soon die. He felt no more fear. He was sure that on this point he could foretell the future better than the god. His folly was not brought home to him. He was killed, indeed, but he thought the man who attacked him was a stranger. He never knew that in his death he had proved Apollo's truth. When he died, he was away from home, and many years had passed since the baby had been left on the mountain. It was reported that a band of robbers had slain him together with his attendants, with all except one who brought the news home. The matter was not carefully investigated because Thebes was in sore straits at the time. The country around was beset by a frightful monster, the Sphinx, a creature shaped like a winged lion, but with the breast and face of a woman. She lay in wait for the wayfarers along the roads to the city, and whomever she see, she put a riddle to, telling him if he could answer it, she would let him go. No one could answer it, and the horrible creature devoured man after man until the city was in a state of siege. The 7 great gates, which were the Thebans' pride, remained closed, and the famine grew near to the citizens. So matters stood when there came into the stricken country a stranger, a man of great courage and great intelligence, whose name was Oedipus. He had left his home, Corinth, where he was held to be the son of the king Polybus, and the reason for his self-exile was another Delphic oracle. Apollo had declared that he was fated to kill his father. He too, like Laos, thought to make it impossible for the oracle to come true. He resolved never to see Polybus again. In his lonely wanderings, he came into the country around Thebes, and he heard what was happening there. He was a homeless, friendless man to whom life meant little, and he determined to seek the Sphinx out and to try to solve the riddle. What creature, the Sphinx asked him, goes on 4 feet in the morning, on 2 at noonday, on 3 in the evening? Man, answered Oedipus. In childhood, he creeps on hands and feet. In manhood, he walks erect. In old age, he helps himself with a staff. It was the right answer. The Sphinx inexplicably, but most fortunately, killed herself. The Thebans were saved. Oedipus gained all and more than he had left. The grateful citizens made him their king, and he married the dead king's wife, his mother, Jocasta. For many years they lived happily. It seemed that this case And in this case, Apollo's words had been proved to be false. But when their two sons had grown to manhood, Thebes was visited by a terrible plague. A blight fell upon everything. Not only were men dying throughout the country, the flocks and herds and the fruits of the field were blasted as well. Those who were spared death by disease faced death by famine. No one suffered more than Oedipus. He regarded himself as the father of the whole state. The people in it were his children. The misery of each one was his too. He dispatched Jocasta, her brother, Creon, to Delphi to implore the gods' help. Creon returned with some good news. Apollo had declared that the plague would be stayed upon one condition. Whoever had murdered King Laos must be punished. Oedipus was enormously relieved. Surely the men or the man could be found even after all these years, and they would know well to punish him. He proclaimed to the people gathered to hear the message Creon brought back. Let no one of this land give shelter to him. Bar him from your homes as one defiled, companioned by pollution. And solemnly I pray, may he who killed wear out his life in evil, being evil. Oedipus took the matter in hand with energy. He sent for Tiresias, the old blind prophet, the most revered of Thebans. Had he any means of finding out, he asked him, who the guilty were? To his amazement and indignation, the seer at first refused to answer him. For the love of God, Oedipus implored him, if you have knowledge. Fools, Tiresias said. Fools, all of you. I will not answer. But when Oedipus went so far as to accuse him of keeping silence because he had himself taken part in the murder, the prophet in his turn was angered, and words he had meant never to speak fell heavily from his lips. You are yourself the murderer you seek. To Oedipus, the old man's mind was wandering. What he said was sheer madness. He ordered him out of his sight and never again to appear before him. Jocasta, too, treated the assertion with scorn. Neither prophets nor oracles have any sure knowledge, she said. She told her husband how the priestess at Delphi had prophesied that Laos should die at the hand of his son, and how he and she together had seen to it that this should not happen by having the child killed. And Laos was murdered by robbers, where three roads meet on the way to Delphi, she concluded triumphantly. Oedipus gave her a strange look. When did this happen? He asked slowly. Well, just before you came to Thebes, she said. How many were with him? Oedipus asked. Well, there were 5 in all. Jocasta spoke quickly. All killed but one. I must see that man, he told her. Send for him. I will, she said, at once. But I have a right to know what is in your mind. You shall know all that I know, he answered. I went to Delphi just before I came here because a man had flung it in my face that I was not the son of Polybus. I went to ask the god. He did not answer me, but he told me horrible things, that I should kill my father, marry my mother, have children men would shudder to look upon. I never went back to Corinth. On my way from Delphi, at a place where 3 roads met, I came upon a man with 4 attendants. He tried to force me from my path. He struck me with a stick. Angered, I fell upon them and I killed them. Could it be the leader was Laos? The one man left alive brought back a tale of robbers, Jocasta said. Laos was killed by robbers, not by his son, the poor innocent who died upon the mountain. As they talked further, proof seemed given them that Apollo could speak falsely. A messenger from Corinth to announce to Oedipus the death of Polybus. O oracle of the god, Jocasta cried, where are you now? The man died, but not by his son's hand. The messenger smiled wisely. Did the fear of killing your father drive you from Corinth? He asked. Ah, king, you are in error. You never had reason to fear, for you were not the son of Polybus. He brought you up as though you were his, but he took you from my hands. Well, where did you get me? Oedipus asked. Who were my father and mother? I know nothing of them, the messenger said. A wandering shepherd gave you to me, a servant of Laos. Yocasta turned white. A look of horror was on her face. Why waste a thought upon that, what such a fellow says, she cried. Nothing he says can matter. She spoke hurriedly yet fiercely. Oedipus could not understand her. My birth does not matter, he asked. For God's sake, go no further, she said. My misery is enough. She broke away and rushed into the palace. At that moment, an old man entered. He and the messenger eyed each other curiously. The very man, O king, the messenger cried, the shepherd who gave you to me. And you, Oedipus asked the other, do you know him as he knows you? The old man did not answer, but the messenger insisted. You must remember, you gave me once a little child you had found, and the king here is that child. Curse you, the other mother muttered. Hold your tongue. What? Oedipus said angrily. You would conspire with him to hide from me what I desire to know? There are ways, be sure, to make you speak. The old man wailed, oh, do not hurt me. I did give him the child, but do not ask more, master, for the love of God. If I have to order you a second time to tell me where you got him, you are lost. Ask your lady, the old man cried. She can tell you best. She gave him to you? Asked Oedipus. Oh yes, the other groaned. I was to kill the child. There was a prophecy. A prophecy, Oedipus repeated, that he should kill his father? Yes, the old man whispered. A cry of agony came from the king. At last he understood. All true. Now shall my light be changed to darkness. I am accursed. He had murdered his father. He had married his father's wife, his own mother. So there was no help for him, for her, for their children. All were accursed. Within the palace, Oedipus wildly sought for his wife, that was his mother. He found her in her chamber. She was dead. When the truth broke upon her, she had killed herself. Standing beside her, he too turned his hand against himself, but not to end his life. He changed his light to darkness. He put out his eyes. The black world of blindness was a refuge. Better to be there than to see with strange, shamed eyes the old world that had been so bright. And so, in the first of three plays about Oedipus the king, we see him in control, married to Jocasta, going to battles. And then in the second one, the plague hits Athens, Thebes, people are dying, and it's getting worse. And in the third play, which is the one we're going to watch the first scene of today, it's about his daughter. And by then, he has gouged out his eyes using pins from his wife's gown. And that's at the end of the play, where he no longer can see because of what he has done. Now, scholars will watch the play that was written at this time. There were three in the trilogy. This last one is about one of his daughters. And the Greeks were famous for not making you sit in a play for the first half hour not knowing what's going on. They knew the stories. And at the beginning of this play, his daughters are together, but the brothers are dead. They have fought in battle and killed each other because they want the power of Thebes. They want control of the land. And so at the very beginning of this play, Oedipus's sons are dead. the new king, Creon, has ordered one will have a military burial, be honored. The other brother has to sit out in the sun and be devoured by scavengers in broad daylight. And because he went against Creon, the brother of these two sisters is now in the town square rotting and not be given a proper burial. She says no to it. And so I usually ask classmates and students in class, if your brother was out there rotting in the sun, would you bury him or leave him to rot? If Antigone tries to bury her brother, the king will kill her because it is the king's decree that the brother will not be buried. So this is a play about the laws of God
Interesting.
versus the laws of man and what is correct. There is not a right or wrong answer, according to the Greeks. The Greeks want individuals to figure that stuff out by themselves, okay? They aren't saying, you better do this, you better do that. What they're putting together in this particular play is think about it and what would you do? Would you bury your brother and follow the law of the gods and do the moral job of giving him a burial and face death? Or would you just leave him out there and not think about it? Somebody else's problem. And that's what the Greeks put in each of their plays. And they wanted individuals to figure it out. All right.
Okay,
So, yeah.
Earlier you were saying how the Greeks were really nasty people, and this goes right along with that of this kind of situation. It's like, you know what I mean? It's almost like really, really super mean to do that, to put somebody in that situation.
Exactly. But in life, we are given those situations. And not necessarily with burying a brother, but
Right,
we
understand. Right.
that there might be a law of God that we would prefer to follow versus what the law of man has created. And is the law of man correct? That's why we have courts of law, and that's why we argue, because they're not always right.
Right.
And as humans, we can make our own decisions based on knowledge, because the Greeks loved knowledge, but they would always put these scenarios in front of us to decide.
Right.
And I know what I would do. I have 3 brothers. I have 3 sisters. And if one of them was out in the town square, naked, being pecked, even though they had passed, but being pecked by scavengers and eaten by coyotes, I know what I would do. But she has a sister, Ismene, who doesn't want to bury the brother. She's a scaredy cat. When we did this play in college, I, of course, wanted to play Antigone, and you don't always get what you want. So he offered me the part of the sister, and he goes, Jane, it's so against you, but try to do her. And so I portrayed the sister who, sits on the fence, can't make a decision, drives me batsola, but any part is a gift in a play. And this particular dilemma, it starts in the very first scene. And so I'm going to share just the first scene of the play so you can meet the sisters. The play itself is pretty short. It's only Greek plays run about an hour 15. You know, they're not 2 hours long. They're in short scenes, but the background of the myth of Oedipus kind of puts you, oh,
It's intense.
it is, and
Short.
it's only it's and it's only 2 pages long, and so there's a book of them, and so it's like, you know, you have to take a break after you read a couple of the myths because it's like, okay, that was a lot of stuff going on. But the Greeks loved the background stories, and they all knew the myths. It was an oral culture, so they talked about the myths, they discussed them, they would watch performances, and then make up their minds. Many were, you know, they'd go to the first play about Oedipus, the second one, and they saw Thebes was just going down the tubes. And then the truth came out about his birth. And so right now, I think I have this scene in the classroom. And if you can't see it or hear it, I will put it in the chat. Let's see.
So the Greek people were very, very intelligent then.
Yes.
One to write it and one to try to understand what was going on.
Exactly. Exactly. And civilizations are known for their, you know, their works, what they leave us. And here is the first scene of the play called Antigone.
Awesome.
And it's his daughter, well, his 2 daughters. And they've got to decide what to do with their brother's body. They loved both brothers. The king loved one, didn't like the other, and now they've got to make a decision. And that's what the Greeks are famous for. So I will share it, but it's also in the chat if you can't hear. Everyone heard it last semester, but I don't argue. I just make sure it's shared. And I will put it on mine.
Can't hear it. Can't hear it, Jane.
You can hear it?
Cannot.
Oh, well, I sent the link in the chat.
Sorry, okay.
Listen. The same blood flows in both our veins, doesn't it, my sister? Blood of Oedipus. And suffering, which was his destiny, is our punishment too. The sentence passed on all his children. Physical pain, contempt, insults, every kind of dishonor. We've seen them all and endured them all, the two of us. And there's more to come. Now, today. Have you heard it? This new proclamation which the king has made to the whole city. Have you heard how those nearest to us are to be treated? With the contempt that we reserve for traitors, people we love.
Nobody has told me anything, Antigone. I've heard nothing, neither good nor bad, about anyone we love. Not since the battle, I mean. The terrible news that both our brothers were dead. One day, one battle, and fratricide twice over. Each brother cutting down his own flesh. But the army from Argos retreated last night. I have heard that. Nothing else to cheer me up or depress me further.
I thought you hadn't. That's why I asked you to meet me here, where I can tell you everything without any risk of being overheard.
What is it then? More terrible news. Something black and frightening, I can see that.
Well, what do you think this may be? Perhaps you can guess. We have two brothers, both of them dead. And Creon has decreed that a decent burial shall be given to one, but not to the other. Eteocles apparently has already been buried with full military honors, not far short of a state funeral, with all the formalities due to the dead meticulously observed, so that his rest in the underworld amongst the heroes is assured. But Polynices, who died in agony just as certainly as his brother did, is not to be buried at all. The decree makes that quite plain. He is to be left, lying where he fell, with no tears or ceremonies of mourning, to stink in the open, till the kites and vultures catch the scent and tear him to pieces and pick him to the bone. Left unburied, there is no rest for him in the underworld, no more than here. What a great king our Creon is, eh, sister? It's against us, you realize, and against me in particular, that he has published this decree. And he'll soon be here himself to make it public to the senators and anyone who may not have heard it. He isn't bluffing. He means to act to make it stick. The punishment for anyone who disobeys the order is public stoning to death. So that's the news. And you know it now. The time has come for you two to stand up and be counted with me, to show whether you are worthy of the honor of being Oedipus' daughter.
Wait a minute, Antigone. Don't be so headstrong. If all this is as you say it is, what can I do, one way or the other?
Just say you'll help me. Commit yourself.
To do what? Something dangerous?
Just to give me a hand to lift the body. It's too heavy for me to move on my own.
To bury him, you mean, in spite of the decree?
He's my brother. And whatever you say, he's yours too. I won't betray him now that he's dead. No one will ever throw that in my face.
You can't do it. Creon has publicly forbidden it.
He cannot forbid me to love my brother. He has neither the right nor the power to do that.
Have you forgotten what happened to our father? Contempt and loathing from everyone, even from himself, that was his reward. And blinded too by his own hand. And his mother-wife, as ill-matched with him as those two words are with each other, she knotted a rope and hanged herself. And now our two brothers, both in one day, caught in the same trap, claiming blood for blood and death for death, each one at the expense of the other. We are the last ones left, sister. And what a death is promised for us, more terrible than any if we break the law by defying the king and the power of the state. Think for a moment, Antigone, please. We're women, that's all. Physically weaker and barred from any political influence. How can we fight against the institutionalized strength of the male sex? They are in power and we have to obey them, or worse tyrannies than these may be inflicted upon us. May God forgive me and the spirits of the dead. We have no choice. State power commands, and we must do as we are told. When you are powerless, wild gestures and heroic refusals are reserved for madmen.
Don't say any more. I won't ask again. In fact, if you were to offer help now, I would refuse it. Do as you please. I intend to bury my brother. And If I die in the attempt, I shall die in the knowledge that I have acted justly, and that will be a kind of happiness. I shall lie peacefully beside my brother, whom I loved in my actions as well as in words. Our lives are short. We have too little time to waste it on men and the laws they make. The approval of the dead is everlasting. And I shall bask in it as I lie among them. Do as you please. Live by all means. The laws you will break are not of man's making.
I reverence them. But how can I defy the unlimited power of the state? What weapons of mine are strong enough for that?
Fine. That's a good excuse. I'll go and shovel the earth on my brother's body.
I'm frightened, Antigone. I'm frightened for you.
Don't be frightened for me. Fear for yourself.
For God's sake, keep it quiet. Don't tell anyone. I'll keep our meeting secret.
Don't you dare. You must tell everyone. Shout it in the streets. If you keep it quiet, I shall begin to hate you.
Fire burning in you, Antigone, but it makes me go cold just to hear you well.
I'm not doing it to please you.
You won't do it at all. You're bound to fail.
I shall fail when I have failed and not before.
But you know it's hopeless. Why begin when you know there's no way you can succeed?
Be quiet! Before I begin to despise you for talking so feebly. He will despise you too. And justly. Then go now. Go! If I'm mad, you can leave me here with my madness, which will doubtless destroy me soon enough. Death is the worst thing that can happen. And some deaths are more honorable than others.
If you've made your mind up, Antigone, it's madness. Remember, I love you. Whatever happens.
Okay, that kind of gave us the first scene out of 11. When you think of plays or movies, they kind of go in acts. The Greeks put short scenes, and they never started way back in their play, in their structures of their plays. Right away, we are given the problem. She's gonna bury her brother. Creon says, if you do, you will be stoned to death in the public square. That means people will get rocks and stones as a public and hit you until you're dead, which was one of the ways of execution back then. So she discusses it with her sister. Her sister is afraid. Fear was always discussed with the Greeks, just like it is in today's world. Greek drama is on page 42 in your book.
One of the things that was brought up was that it was the man's rule.
Yep.
So, but in that, it's interesting because how still that's going on, the man versus the woman.
Exactly.
But at that time in Greece, I suppose, weren't women landowners and property owners?
Some were,
The
but
rich,
right, and they were queens.
right.
But the king in this particular story is male, and
Mhm.
it is a male-dominated society. When you
Okay.
look at the who's who with
Nothing
contributions,
changed.
but she brings it up, and the playwright Sophocles was man. He was a male, and we do have a couple of his scripts remaining. He put female leads in his stories, and the titles were their female names. And so by doing that, it kind of shows that there was bucking the trend of just listening to the man's side, the man's version. And that's why this particular play has become a classic and is gone to. It's put in high school literature books at an early level, 10th grade level, where students can study it. You know, the subject material and matter is intense, but it is a debate about the laws of men versus the laws of God. And what do you go for? What do you, as an individual, which decision do you make? And that's why the Greeks are delightful to study, because they don't put it on you that it's got to be this way or else. They put it out there, and then they kind of make you think about it and mull it over, and for good or bad, make your own decisions, which is genius, because it pushes you to critically think about an issue and the levels and the layers. On 42 in your book, they talk about Greek drama. And then on 43, there's a picture of the outdoor amphitheater that would seat 10,000 people. It was outside, of course, and you see the background of Greeks, the Greek islands. They had the semicircle stages, and sometimes they had a complete circle, so circle in the round. And we still have stages today that are like that, especially outdoor. And they began theater with just questioning, why is this going on? And so in the spring of the year, they would have festivals and do a bunch of plays, because they would be praying to the goddess of fertility, and they would want the best for their crops. And so they would meet after they planted their crops and have festivals. And we do that today. We still have festivals after the crop is in certain communities. And then in the fall, they would do the theater festivals again once the crops were harvested. And those festivals were in honor of the god of wine, and his name was Dionysus. And he's pretty famous in some of the complicated stories of Greek. And then he's also a character in Roman times, different name. And so you have spring festivals. Once the crops were planted, they'd have these play festivals, and then they would honor the goddess of fertility. Her name was Demeter. And then in the fall, once the crops were harvested, they'd have more festivals, and they would honor the god of wine, Dionysus. And so on 43, you will see mentions of both of their names.
So
Yeah.
is that, I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
No, that's okay.
Is that the same as the, what do you call it when the name slips my mind right now, where there's celebrations when the time changes, let's say spring and then
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Solstice.
yeah.
Yes.
So is that
right?
The same? Okay.
It's similar, because you have to have a reason to gather, a reason to celebrate. And for the Greeks, they made it on their seasonal schedules that once their crops were in, then they would have time for the play festivals. And many times there were 3 tragedies. So you'd have the 3 plays about Oedipus, and then they'd throw in a comedy. And so people would end the day laughing, because after 3 about Oedipus, you're ready for a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
But they did have really good playwrights. They had a guy named Sophocles who wrote this one. They had a guy named Aeschylus, and then Euripides. So those were considered the 3 great playwrights. And Euripides wrote one about Medea, and that was a famous female. And then they had a comic playwright, pretty famous, and we some of his works have been saved. And his name, and it's on 43, his name was Aristophanes. And you will see with the next chapter that the Romans kind of copy everything from Greek times and put a stamp on it, but they call it Roman. They'll take the Greek gods and goddesses, change the names, but some of the same behaviors are given to those gods and goddesses. But when you take a look at these amphitheaters, The one on 43 has 13,000 capacity. So we know that Target Center probably in Minneapolis, probably 50, 60,000 maybe, 50,000. And then the Excel is a little bit smaller in St. Paul. I think our Bismarck Civic Center is about 5 to 6,000. It seems big when you're in there, but then when you take a look at this and it's double, and it's outdoor, and so they had to walk up to the nosebleed sections. But this kind of gives you a glimpse of the background of a play, and then that they start right in the middle of things at the beginning of the show. But you know what the problem is because the two sisters discuss the background of their father, their brothers. They mention Yocasta as being the mother wife and the incest, the taboo of incest in the family and the curse on their house. And so there's 10 more scenes in this particular play. And we may watch a little bit more on Thursday. We'll see how far along we get with some of the information today. All right. It's 10:20. We'll take about an 8-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to build our Google Docs and our Google Slides for our projects. And I'm just going to go over the specifics of the project so that you know instead of a midterm for this class, you will have projects on a Native American artist. The artist can be living or past. And we'll go through the lists of ones that have been done before. So I will see you guys back here at like 10:28. How's that?
See you.
See you in a bit.
Mhm. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe my headset, it said it had 9 hours left. So what we'll do now is create documents and a slide presentation. They'll be empty, but then you'll post them in Google Classroom and they will be there for you to add to. And you don't have to save it every time you write in it. It automatically uploads. And so that's why many teachers are using that form. It's efficient and nothing ever gets lost. But I do kind of run through the midterms so you guys know what's expected. So if you have your tab open for Google Classroom, the first thing you have to do is think of somebody you are going to write about. And the midterm project is due June 18th. And here's where you're going to post your artist's name. The paper is about a Native American artist. There are no duplicates. And then you'll do a 12-slide presentation. And so here's the class list for this summer. The paper is due June 18th. And then your second project is due in July. And then if you scroll, if you're into this document right now where it says topics, if you look, there is a list of artists that have already been done. And so it's alphabetical. And so you will see the names of artists that aren't available, because we've recently had papers on them, and there's so many others to do that these are the ones that are a no-go. So if you put a name that's from this list, you won't be able to get credit, all right? And you need to put the name of the artist this week. Any questions on that? So if you just type in this document, it saves it. It shows me all the edits.
Okay, awesome.
All right. And I want you to take some time and, you know, kind of think, okay, who should I do? Blah, blah, blah. Now, in the instructions, if you need an idea, there are lots of links for Native American artists. And the library at UTTC also has really good Indigenous art links. Here is a Google Doc, the blue link there, that kind of goes into detail about these two projects for the humanities class. Kids have been very successful with these. They're not meant to be, you know, 10 hours long with assignment, with homework. And so if you just take a look at this Google Doc, and it gives you project 1 is a Native American artist essay with 3 references and a 12-slide Google presentation using the same information. So you'll take what you write in your essay and then just give us a fact and a picture on each of the slides. And then our second project, instead of a final test, is a creative original project where you use Blog. It's the Google app, and it's called Blogger. And you write 5 posts, and that you will also share this with the class, and that'll be our final test. So where to start? Well, in the UTTC library, they have something called the American Indian Experience, the American Mosaic. The URL is there, and then the user and the password codes. There's another one called American Indian History Online, and I also put the user and the password. Then we have some place called Odin, and there's the link, the code, and the password. Students like Odin searches. Those are their favorite databases because you have to have 3 references. I also am a teacher that allows you to use the artist's website, their Etsy page, their Instagram. If they have a website with a lot of good information, I'm one that lets you use some social media. If you've never made a Google Doc, okay, anybody in here have you all made a Google Doc? Olivia, Samira,
Yes.
Tiana, no, DJ,
I haven't made a Google Doc.
okay, Haley L. And if you don't respond, I write your names down because that's for attendance. Parker, have you made a Google Doc?
Yes.
Marcy?
Yes.
Angel? All right, I will run through it quickly because I know it's review for some of you, but it's also on this form. To make a Google Doc, you go to Gmail, you go to Drive, the 9 dots in the upper right corner, you click Drive. Where it says Drive, it says Create or New, Create New Google Doc. And then I want you to give it a name. So if it says Untitled, get rid of it and put your initials, Humanities A, Project 1 paper. And then share the link. You can share it with me, and then I want you to copy the link and post it on the class website. As students, you should always double check that the document opens. A reminder that Google Docs saves automatically in Google Drive every time an update or edit is done. So you don't have to resend it.
Awesome.
All right, and then the Google slide presentation. We don't have a website anymore in our humanities class. I have them from other semesters, but I'm not going to use one in this class. Again, it's the same, you go into Drive. Drive is the answer because you're driving a car, you're driving your work. And you'll go to Click Drive, create new Google Slides, use your initials, humanities section, project for naming slides. Okay. Again, share with me and then copy the link of the slides and post on the class website. The first slide will just be about the artist. Slides 2 through 11 will be 1 fact and 1 image about your artist. And yes, Parker, they can be musicians. And slide number 12 are your 3 references. All right. So I'm going to do one of each. So it's recorded. If you miss class, I don't have to reteach it. So I'm going to my Drive. I'm going to where it says new on the left side. And you guys can do this while I'm doing it. So we get them posted. They can be empty. That's the way it works at the beginning. And then we want Google Doc. Click Google Doc. And then up here where it says Untitled, I like names. So for you guys, it's putting an initial. So put your initials, humanities A, summer 21, project 1 paper. Okay, so I have your initials, humanities A, summer 2021, project 1 paper. Then on the top right, hit share. And you would share it to Overmo J. at gmail.com. And you hit the button share and you'd hit copy link. So the link is now copied. And you would go to the assignment. And it should be at the very top here. And you would hit comment and add your post. Click post and you'll see the blue live link. All right, so now we have in our Google Classroom under this, we have a link for the paper. And we're also going to put the Google Slides here because we have a small class. And so now that we've got that done, we'll go back to Drive where it says New. We'll click Google Slides, blank. We don't want Untitled. And you do get some points for this in class today, because I put that in the grade book over the weekend. And we want to do 12 slides, but we want to give it a name. Humanities A, Summer 21, Project 1. And I know they're Google Slides. Okay. And here is where you can insert your slides. New slide, and you'll make 12 of them. Okay. And you can clean them up and make them pretty down the road, but we want 12 empty slides right now. Okay. So, and you can put backgrounds to them, etc. So we have JO Humanities A, Summer 21, Project 1, and we want to share the link to our classroom. So the top right button, you'll share it to my Gmail and then copy the link and then bring it over to where this assignment is and add another comment. Angel's put hers there. And I have my doc and my slides. And we'll just take a few minutes and get that taken care of today. Thank you, Angel. And I'll just double check to see if I can open. Yep. Okay, got Marcy's. It says I need access, so then I just sent you a Gmail.
Did you get mine, Jane?
Nope, not yet.
Mhm.
Are you posting it where it's at the very top of Google Classroom?
Oh my God. I put your email in there where it said to share.
Right, and then you also copy the link. So hit share again,
Okay.
and then it says copy link.
Oh, okay.
So click that and then bring that over into the classroom
Okay.
and post it where you see the others.
In the classroom.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's at the very top.
with add groups, add people in groups.
No,
Oh,
it's just copy link,
right.
and then you'll add a comment where it says add a comment.
Dang it.
It's the top assignment in Google Classroom where it says
Okay, let me get back to it.
Native American artist paper and 12 slides. Should be at the very top. Okay, I have 7. I got Marcy, Angel, and Angel so far.
You want to refresh? I just sent mine.
Dang it.
It should just beam up. I don't have to refresh. So there you go. Parker's is across. And here is where you put both your doc, your Google Doc, and your Google Slides. So they're all in one place. When we present, they're all here.
Okay, I'm at Google Classroom now.
Okay, it's the top assignment.
Top
There you
assignment.
go. So Marcy's got, let's see who else is in here. See if Marcy's opens. Yep.
You want us to share our paper right there too?
Yes. So slides and paper.
Did that work?
Did you add a comment?
Yes. Private comment?
It should just be add class comment.
Oh my God.
I will just put it in the chat if it makes it easier.
Oh, I'll go share link.
And that should be the link that lets you just post your Google document and your Google slide presentation.
Okay, that was a pain. Okay, you should have got it now.
All right, I will look in classroom.
Oh my God.
Yep, I got them. So I have Angel, Parker, Marcy, Parker, Olivia, and you already know. And then I'll just double check to see if they open. Olivia's opens. And you already know, Samira, it opens. All right, so awesome. And then I also want where you commented your Google Slides. And I always take kind of a moment at the beginning of the semester so that we get them posted and that you understand that once you start typing in and putting your information in, it saves automatically. which is really nice. So you don't have to keep resending it, etc.
Oh my God, this is driving me nuts.
Is it driving you nuts?
Well, it keeps asking me questions. You got it? You got it? You know.
Oh, your computer does?
Yeah.
Oh. So, and I do give in the grade book today, if you do post them, you'll get a few points for just putting your docs posted and your Google Slides. Two, three, four. So 5 out of the 8 students posted. All right. A few more minutes, take care of that. Olivia, I like your icon, your image.
Thank you.
Okay. Now that we have that started, we're going to continue forward. And if you look, they talk about the philosophers in Greek times. And does anybody in here know what philosophy is? What is it the study of? Any guesses?
Philosophy, that's almost not a, let's see, philosophy would be a way that almost a way a life should,
Close.
easy, hard question.
Study of truth. It's questioning. It's a way of thinking. So you're all in the ballpark, okay? And the philosophers from this era are huge. And a lot of tragedy befell them because they were revolutionary, and people who don't go with what you're supposed to go with sometimes get themselves into a little trouble. But they are still taught today, and they are a way of teaching as well. So you had a couple of the dudes, Aristotle. I use him in my speech class. When we do the persuasive speech, we talk about ethos, logos, pathos, 3 appeals. Then there's a guy named Socrates in the Greek times. Not a good ending there, but the Socratic method, if you've ever known a 3-year-old, they ask questions all the time. And so in teaching, they always talk about the Socratic method, which is asking questions. Olivia asks questions. They're pertinent. She's paying attention. They're creative. They're fun. They want further explanation. But if you know a 3-year-old, they come up to you sometimes and they go, why? You know, like, why do we have this for food? Why do we have to go there today? Why do I have to get shots? And so the Socratic method from the dude Socrates is one of the Greeks. And then the third one was a student of the others. His name was Plato, which sounds like clay, and Play-Doh. Well, that's where they took it from. But again, the Platonic reasons of ways of thinking and studying. And these dudes would sit in the public square and do their teachings and do their arguments. And we have modeled this.
Based on what though? Like
Well, on
Bible.
information and based on what was going on politically at the time,
Right.
and based on what the rules of law were doing and the new democracies, because we have to question.
Mm.
And, you know, you can get a major in philosophy, but many of those programs have been cut to make more room for technology. But it's questioning, and it's the way we think. And so these great philosophers, famous, still being taught today, they kind of cause a ruckus once in a while in the public square, but it was the first kind of institutions for teaching and for educating the masses. Because, you know, sometimes it was just the legislators and the government and the higher ups that were listening, but eventually masses and public were listening to the teachings. And it's very important that the Greeks are known for the philosophers. And so I had to bring them up because we can't skip Greeks without, you know, the use of their mythology, the plays they produced, the philosophers, and then in your book, they talk about, on page 49, and they give you a visual, because I'm a visual learner, and it's like, I like text, I like to hear, but there's a little chart there in this book that talks about the allegory of the cave. And the allegory of the cave was written in Plato's book. It's a skinny little book called The Republic, okay? He uses a literary device known as an allegory to illustrate the dilemma facing the psyche in its ascent to knowledge of the imperishable and unchanging forms. By way of the allegory, the device by which the literal meaning of a text shows a hidden meaning, Plato describes a group of ordinary mortals chained within an underground chamber, which is an allegory for the psyche imprisoned within the human body. So the dude, Plato, has two things going on at once. Their woeful position permits them to see only the shadows on the walls of the cave, the imperfect and the perishable imitations. But the prisoners in this cave think the shadows are real. The allegory of the cave illustrates the key theory of idealism. Reality lies in the realm of unchanging forms. And so Plato, in his idealism or his way of philosophy, way of thinking, the body belongs to the sensory or to the material world.
That's how I see this picture though.
Exactly.
The prisoners are looking at the persons, they're trapped in that person, or they're that same person trapped.
Exactly.
Right.
You've got the cave, the roadway, the diffused daylight, the fire, and the rough ascent to sunlight. And so he brings that parallel living, the mind, the psyche versus the reality. The business of philosophy, he says, Plato, is to educate the psyche, to draw it out of its material prison so it can regain its perfect awareness. And his book, we did read in world literature, but it's not lengthy, The Republic. And he sets forth these creative ideas on how to view the world and how to think about our world. And it's not complicated reading, because translations can bring it down to our level and really give it common sense. Because I'm kind of a common sense type. I go, what is it saying? What does it mean? But the visual on 49 kind of gives us the picture of Plato's allegory of the cave. And then the other guy is on page 50. His name is Aristotle. And again, I mentioned that his work is used in psychology classes, sociology. I use Aristotle in my unit on persuasion and speech class because he talks about logic, emotions, and ethics. And he was a great teacher of philosophy. And he gave us many, many works. All right, and then the chapter kind of ends with Greek sculpture and the realism of the anatomy of the male figures and the female figure on 56. And I do have a PowerPoint with a couple slides that give brief explanations. So you also get a visual as the PowerPoint kind of explains it to you. So next I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you.
How much did the Greeks take from the Egyptians?
Oh, I think plenty. Because number one, you know, the Mediterranean Sea, Egypt touched it, Northern Africa, and then Greece was in the Mediterranean. So just in the geography part, I would say lots. Okay.
Because it seems like a lot of the stories are kind of the same.
Yes.
The same
myths. Yeah.
Right, right.
Okay, so this one is from another humanities book. I located supplemental materials last year. This one's about the Hellenistic world in Greece and the School of Hellas. It's not a lengthy PowerPoint. I have a few that I have located from other books, but they show many of the works. And so I will present this now so we can kind of walk through it slowly. And you have visuals in your text, but sometimes it also helps to see it here in this setting. And just what we've done today in class, you know, we've talked about Socrates and Plato. You had a video about Athenian greatness. I talked to you about Greek tragedy and the myth of Oedipus, and you saw the first scene of Antigone. And now we'll see a little bit about art. So the Acropolis is still there. The Persians came over from Iraq and destroyed Athens in about 500 BC. And so things had to be rebuilt. And so when you rebuild, sometimes you rebuild better. And so this afforded the Athenians to create one of the greatest monumental spaces in the history of Western architecture.
Awesome.
Then we have, what role did eudaimonia play in Athenian life? Agora is an open place, kind of a market. For Aristotle, the purpose of the polis was to guarantee each citizen that they might flourish. You had a council of 500 was elected annually, and occupation of citizens to exercise their political duties. Here is a modern artist rendering of the city of Athens. You can kind of see the roads, the walls, the Acropolis, kind of in the center. And we have temples, the theater of Dionysus as the god of wine.
Is that a wall all the way around? Or
Yes, yes, because there was a battle a week. I mean, they had, battles were happening spur of the moment. And so many of the cities had the walls surrounding them. This is called the Stoa of Adelos. It's got a traditional form. You see in the top of the hill, the Acropolis, closest to the gods and goddesses. And you have how you can see some ancient civilizations in some of the building here. But also with the columns, you see Greek. The good life and the politics of Athens, the slaves and the medics, working fell to slaves. The medics were free men who were not citizens because they came from other parts of Greece or from a Greek colony. 100,000 people were slaves. Almost every citizen of Greece had at least one slave attendant and a female domestic servant. Most sculptors, potters, and painters came from abroad, and they were medics. The women of Athens, they were not citizens. They were usually married by 15. They were meant to produce male offspring. They were involved in religious rituals and public festivals.
what happened to the female offspring? Were they treated?
Well, I'm sure that they were raised to
Well, of
raise
course, but
more. Some city-states treated women better than the Athenians did. So it varied from city-state to city-state on how they treated women. Pericles in the school of Hellas, it was democracy's strongest advocate. They had a war between Sparta and Athens, which was in your first video today.
and school of Hellas, that is the school of Greece, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Beautiful mind, beautiful body. 5th century Greek culture spawned new way of thinking. Forces that governed the natural world were knowable. We had the cult of the human body was developed. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, he saw mind's ability to influence the physical body for good or ill. And today, our medical people, our doctors, take the Hippocratic Oath. So he is still an influence in medicine today. In the Golden Age, the beautiful body comes to reflect physical and mental superiority. Sculpture emphasized symmetry, balance, liveliness, and weight shift. So there, you see the one leg in front of the other, where from Egyptian times, many were just frontal views, standing quite rigid, quite straight, or a side profile. Now here, the Greeks had the models put a step ahead of the other. So it's more naturalistic.
But this was also the study of perspective.
Yes.
So there was a lot more behind it. It was,
Yep.
well, like you said, body and mind, but it's the study of the form.
Exactly. And you get almost motion now in sculpture with, if you notice, his foot is raised, so he's almost in a walk. Plus the arm placement is up on one side. And so you get this ideal look of a figure. And the knuckles, the index finger, the chin, And so you get this proportion in sculpture.
So forgive me, but I'm still trying to figure out why it's the Greece or the Greece, all of these sayings, Hippocrates, and why that's such a main. Why is it a class, or why is it being used today still? Why isn't I know there's some oh my god, his name slips my mind, a Chinese philosopher, was it?
Yep, Confucius.
Confucius came up with some stuff, but none of that stuff is I mean, it's not as used as Greece.
I
Same
think
time,
it is. Confucius is out there in philosophy, and he is in this chapter. Some of
but
his
yeah, what I'm getting at is like the Chinese, or maybe the Mayans, or the Native Americans, or different societies where um, their philosophies or their teaching is not pronoun as the Greeks are. That's what I'm getting at.
right.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think coverage of those civilizations is here in this textbook. It wasn't so much in the textbook that we used last year because they ran out of copies for that one. But I did notice with this textbook, there's more coverage with those other civilizations. And so in an intro to humanities, you try to cover civilization after civilization, knowing full well that the others were, it was still going on during the Greeks in other places.
But what I'm getting at is all of these are Caucasian people. I mean, I don't know how else better to say it.
Right.
So even in today's world, Caucasian people are becoming less of the majority, and they even have an issue with that because the Caucasian people want to be on top, specifically the Caucasian male figure.
Right. But the world is multicultural. It's many cultures. And, this class is just based pretty much on a textbook that covers a couple different kinds of cultures. And Africans are in a chapter in this textbook and Native Americans are in a chapter. The Chinese are covered as an ancient, and then you will see Japanese and Indian and the Middle East being brought to light. But I totally get your comment. The white male, why do we talk about white males?
Right.
But at the same time, in a class designed like this, we will dissipate from the Greek civilization, go into the Roman, and then we go into world religions, which gives us some a variance, because you're kind of saying, well, we need more variety. Yes, I agree with you. Here's another sculpture called Warrior. This one's in Italy. The height of this particular sculpture is 6'9". This is Pericles in the School of Hellas, rebuilding the Acropolis. And this kind of gives you an idea of the look and the architecture and the landscape with the rocks, the height of the Parthenon and other temples. There's the Temple of Athena. So you can see how they kind of put it in layers.
I would love to see that.
I know. Or even, well, they have drones now that fly over it for us, and for tourists and people who love geography, because drones can kind of give us an aerial view as well as Google Maps. Because when you get to the Mediterranean Sea and area, the temperature is usually always 75 degrees year round.
Nice.
They say, you go to San Diego, it's kind of Mediterranean temperature, and it's like, oh yeah. But that gives us kind of a bird's eye view of the people there and the difficulty it must have been to produce such works in that area.
Well, back then, no one was watching TV and surfing the internet. They had other things to do.
You see the type of columns. And then you also see on the relief the story told at the top. And it has the porch of the maidens. So you see the female statues there. This one's in Canada. The model of the Athena Parthenos. It's just a model based on it.
Oh.
The size versus, models of people.
Is that actual size?
Yes, it's a model of it, but yes, actual size of
the
her.
little people on the bottom, is that giving it its relation to how big it is?
Yeah. That would be you and me at the bottom there in the museum. And this one's in Toronto, in Canada. So this is how it must have originally appeared. And a couple of summers ago, I went over to Chicago and went to their Museum of Art. And in the door, as soon as you walk in, it's like the textbook. You're in Egypt. Nice. And they have artifacts. And then you go into Greek and you have artifacts and their models and their sculptures. And some are very, very tall. I was just taken aback. And then you go into Roman. And so it just goes from place and time zones.
Nice.
And I always tell students, if you ever are in Chicago, I could spend 2 weeks in that Institute of Art. I spent a day and I barely, I got to almost all the floors, but it was like, oh, this is crazy good. And then you learn the history as well. Young men on horseback, so we're starting to see that procession, which is completely around the Parthenon.
That would have been outside the.
Yes.
Crop. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. This is either Dionysus, the god of wine, or Heracles. And this is on the east pediment of the Parthenon. As the sun passed over the three-dimensional relief on the east and west pediments, the sculptures would have appeared almost animated by the changing light and the movement of their cast shadows. Again, everyone is individual with their interpretation of this posture, but you see it in a pose that is sitting. Arm is relaxed, the other arm is extended, kind of right angle, and then the legs, of course. And the centaur there, half man, half horse. The Lapith overcoming a centaur. The Lapiths are a people in Greek myth who defeated drunken centaurs at the wedding of their king. The Greeks identified centaurs with the Persians, whom they considered the embodiment of chaos, possessing centaur-like forces of irrationality. Because they were from a different civilization, Middle East, the Persians, and so they didn't understand the way they were, their culture. And so they would make art then to show that the difference and the dissonance between the two. Philosophy, we have the death of Socrates, marked the end of the Golden Age. The philosophical context, we talked about this briefly, but pre-Socrates was explain the natural universe. The sophist tradition, how do we know what we think we know, which is the basis of humanism. And then Socrates and the sophists, they like questions and answers. They like conversations and they like dialogues. They call it the dialectical method, which is still used in K-12 and in college, where we go through question answer, discussion. Why is this happening? What is this about? Why are we learning about the Greeks? Plato's Republic. Seriously, it has to be asked. And idealism. And so the Greeks were thinking, you know, what is our ideal? What do we hope is the best effort ever? Because we all as individuals, we have ideals. We want to work toward a goal. We want to cook good food. We want to go visit a certain country. We want to take care of our family. We each as individuals have ideals. Plato was a student of Socrates. Plato, his philosophy was a brand of idealism. He sought perfection in pure ideas, untainted by reality. He wrote the Republic, which has the allegory of the cave in it. And his ideal state is something that is reactionary, opposed individualism. You know, so it was always that answer to that question. And here is another illustration of Plato's very famous allegory of a cave, where you have humans there, the shadows there. And Symposium is another book. The Symposium is an all-male drinking party except for slaves and a nude female flute player. Wine is poured to honor the spirits. And his Symposium recounts a story of just such a dinner party. Each party member makes a speech about the nature of love and sexuality, or Eros, the god of love. Here's a part of a painted tomb. This is a rare surviving example of Greek painting. So we do get some colors. And it's a party scene.
They were bad.
Well, they were human, but they did not lie about it.
They
They
took it to the
they could have
extreme.
just said it was all hunky dory, but
Yeah.
they gave us as much, and we're grateful to having at least some things remain. The theater of the people, drama was originally participatory ritual. The seasons, I told you, in the spring and in the fall, they would go to pay their respects in festivals. It was tied to the god of wine, Dionysus, and parties with dance, music, and wine. Um, and it gave rise to the satire play or the satyr play, which is comedy. And so after all those tragedies, drama, they decided they had to have something funny to end the day with. And so they started poking fun of people. And in today's, situation comedies on TV, on Netflix, romantic comedies, rom-coms, we've got satire constantly, late night television. Here we have the satires or the satyrs making wine. You've got your grapes. The entire ritual of wine production is depicted here, from harvesting the grapes to stomping them to render their juice, to pour in the juice into large vats for fermentation. All of that leads to the state of ecstasy, which is a Greek term painted across the top brand. So after going through a whole process, then you get into this state of ecstasy. Comedy. It was designed to make people laugh. Plays slandered, buffooned, and ridiculed politicians, generals, gods, women's, and slave. And the only plays of Aristophanes survive. And I was lucky in my undergraduate to do this play called Lysistrata. It's a comedy. Number one, Aristophanes wrote comedies. And I just saw this done at NDSU about 5 years ago. And they brought it to today's world. So all their costumes and music, it looked like punk rockers. Okay, it was very loud. Costumes were fabulous. Silvers, golds, hot pinks, hot everything, neon. And it's a story of women who are pissed off because their men keep going to war. And so they get together, these women, they huddle, and they talk about, what are we going to do about this? These men, they go to war all the time. How do we, how can we barter with them? What's the trade-off here? And so they get together at the beginning of the play, and they're already complaining, a group of women. And they decide that if their husbands go to one more war, they're cutting sex off.
I was just going to say, oh my God.
No more sex. If you go to war, no more sex. And through the course of this 1 hour, and it's about an hour, 15-minute show, it was a hoot when I saw it at NDSU a couple of years ago, because it was like, they're still talking about what goes on today, because we still go to war. And it's not just a male-female thing anymore, because women go to war. But the whole idea of how do we stop this? They go to war to go to war, and it takes a toll on us. And so you have all these women, all various personalities at the beginning of the show, trying to come up with reasons. What is something we can do all together to stop these men from going to war? And it works, because at the end of the play, everybody's happy. But it kind of gives perspective that something light and silly can make change. Here we have a red figure crater depicting a comedy. We see the older guy there, one side tugging that, one on the other side tugging that. on a stage supported by columns with a scenic backdrop to the left. He's got his riches and his strong box. He's trying to hold on to it. And you have the robbers kind of tug of war over the money. And so from their artwork, we also get a little comedy. Tragedy, it was designed around conflict and tensions. It explored physical and moral depths, especially death. From the playwright Aeschylus, we have 3 plays. From Sophocles, we have 7 works, and you saw scene 1 of Antigone. Euripides, we have 90 of his works. And those were the guys that wrote the tragedies. The performance space, your textbook shows you the amphitheaters. They were performed in an open area because the weather is so gorgeous in the Mediterranean area. The Athenians built a new theater in which the orchestra was transformed into a circular space with entryways on each side. The stage was elevated, and the artists were employed to paint the sets. And here's a photo of what you have in your text. It's kind of a democratic design. It's like when you go to the Guthrie in Minneapolis, there isn't a bad seat. There isn't. It's designed so that every playgoer, everybody who sits in that audience sees and hears the show. And because they had 13,000 people in this audience, number one, acoustics. And we know that works out at Medora when they built that theater on the side of the Badlands, that the acoustics, same with Red Rocks in Colorado, there is a natural sound system. And so this theater is renowned for its democratic design, but the acoustics are unparalleled. A person sitting in the very top row, nosebleed, can hear a pin drop on the orchestra floor.
That's awesome.
Natural acoustics. And here's a design that kind of lets you see the parts of the stage, and that the actors and the people who built the props would have plenty of room to roll things in. They had tiered seating. They had aisles for coming and going, gangways, you know, so they had an ability to add more technical things in the gangways, the ramps, the scene, the proscenium, which is still used in theaters today.
No concessions.
Oh, they brought their own. Yeah, and usually by the 4th show, nobody was standing.
Right.
And then here's more information on the Empire of Alexander the Great, and the location of Greece, and then what he managed to conquer. Crazy. Egypt, Northern Africa. He went into Italy, past Italy, up into Germany, the Danube. Black Sea is Russia. Then you have the Middle East with Iraq, parts of Arabia, and he went all the way to India and parts of China. So you can see the campaigns of Alexander the Great. He did not live a long life, but how the Greeks tried to conquer most of this part of the world, and in doing so, didn't last very much longer, because once you start reaching out and conquering, the home front then kind of goes down.
I forgot the story behind how he died. Killed?
It should be.
Sure he was.
Yeah. He, within 12 years, he created, okay, we just saw that map.
I thought I'd seen a documentary on him before.
Yeah. It doesn't say in the textbook. How did Alexander the Great, oh, I've typed it in before, the Great die? He died at age 32.
Wow.
Some say it was malaria. Others believed he was poisoned. So there's a mystery to his death, but he conquered all that by age 32. This is the goddess of love. A little bit on Aristotle. This was exported to Germany.
It's a shame.
Particularly notable here is the extended arm, this thing right here, of the kneeling warrior in the center, which kind of comes closer to us as viewers. There's a lot going on in this particular frieze. Athena, the goddess of war, grabs the hair of a winged serpent-tailed monster. You can see that, her right hand, who is identified on the base of the monument. He is the son of the earth goddess Ji. Ji, because her son's being grabbed, herself rises up from the ground on the right to avenge her son. Behind her, a winged Nike flies to Athena's rescue. So you have 4 different bodies in this one frieze. Athena, Nike, that's where the shoe comes from, or is a Greek god, Nike. And then you have a goddess down here who's defending her son. Serpent, because you see the snake tail there.
I wonder what the snake depicted. If it was, whether it was a god or if it was a omen.
Well, he's a serpent-tailed monster.
Oh.
So he's half man, and then his body ends with the serpent's tail. And they combined a lot of animals with human form for their myths. The pair are a study in contrast. The wife is clothed, her husband nude, she dropping to the ground, he looking heavenward, her body falling limp, his torqued in action. And such contrast is yet another characteristic of expressionism from this era. A couple things going on at once. This particular Gaul seems resigned to his fate, pressing against the ground to support himself against death. and also determined to show his valor and his strength to the end, holding himself up as long as he can. Such emotional ambiguity is an integral aspect of Hellenistic art. And you can probably see the wound in his chest or from his hands, you know, the markings there. But from one pose, you get strength, courage, valor, and also that his time is ending. Nike, which is a symbol of victory, appears so immediate and alive that the viewer can almost feel the gust of wind that blows across her body and the way that the clothing is draped.
8'1".
And this one's in the Louvre in Paris. Okay. This one's from Egypt. It's a coffin. The mummy portraits were executed in encaustic. It's a medium composed of beeswax and pigment. Applied in molten form, it fuses to the surface to create a lustrous enamel effect of intense color. It is the most durable of all artists' paints, since wax is impervious to moisture. As the Egyptian mummy portraits attest over time, encaustic retains all the freshness of a newly finished work.
Nice.
All right, so I wanted to do some visuals with you guys today, so you get a little flavor with listening to videos in background history, location, civilization, that you got to get to know a myth about Oedipus, and then watch a scene from the third play in the trilogy, named after his daughter Antigone, and the dilemma that Greek plays ask us. And every play is the same. You know, there may be 10 to 12 scenes. They're not lengthy. You don't get bored. They start in the middle of the action, so you don't sit there for a half hour going, what's going on? I mean, we met the sisters right away, and we would have known they were sisters without knowing the myth. But then knowing the background that, you know, they're a product of their dad and their grandma.
Oh, God.
Kind of puts you in the seat in the theater going, this is a mess. This is a mess. And so as we learn about the Greeks and what they've passed on, no subject really was taboo for them in their poetry, in their literature, in their philosophy. And I think that's why it's considered classicism in this textbook. And in most intro to humanities, general ed, across the North Dakota University system, because I checked to see what all two-year colleges were using before I decided on this book. And this book is very similar to the one that they had here for a long time. It's just a couple new chapters in it, but it's what the lasting impression is. When you finish this class, I have you do a reflection on a Google form, and every semester, the answers are from everywhere in the book, from the videos, from an artwork. I ask you to think about 6 artifacts that kind of stay with you after going through the humanities class. And it's like, I look at the Excel document with the responses, every section, And the answers are all completely different, because as individuals, you will make determinations. Oh, this draws me. This has meaning. I'm relating to this. And it could be something down the road that really sticks with you. But the Greeks, the lasting impression is that at least some of the works have survived. And they did give us the Olympics. They gave us democracy in its form. They gave us great stories and myths. And so their sculptures are not boring. They're from real human beings to their gods and goddesses. Their architecture is phenomenal. And so we are grateful to what they have given us. So a little bit more on the Greeks Thursday. It's like, can you do a chapter, a class period? Well, yeah, I've taught night classes for quite a while. And, you go in at 7 at night, you leave at 10, and it's like, God, can you cover a chapter in 3 hours? Yes, we can. And so we'll kind of wrap up the Greeks on Wednesday. You'll have one discussion question, one metaphor, and one quiz. And you have Quizlet to help you with the terms, so those shouldn't take you too long. I do want you to select your Native American artist soon. And again, look at the list that's already been done, because I don't like duplicates. And there's a lot to use. You can do music, art, beaters, you can do film artists, you can do, we've had everything. And I'll show you some examples of student work so you get the visual. This is how long the essay is. It's 5 paragraphs. This is the Google slide, and this is an example of student work. So I will see you guys on Wednesday. If you want to talk about it. Yeah, if you have a question, shoot me a Gmail.
I have a quick question right now.
Okay.
I was wondering, I realized last night, because I was checking to make sure that there wasn't any homework due, I realized that I didn't mark all of the assignments from last week as done in Google Classroom. So I wasn't sure if all of my assignments were then late, because...
Well, I went in Saturday morning because you had a due date of Friday. And so that's when I posted what I saw.
Because I did it directly after class.
Oh, so I can check to see if your work is there. Did you get credit for some?
One of the assignments I had marked as done.
Okay.
But the other ones I did it, the submitting, they were the ones that I submitted in whatever form you had. But then when I exited out into just the Google Classroom page, I got to say mark is done. So it said that I was missing it last night. So I quickly did that.
Oh, you did it last night then?
No, I didn't. I marked it as done last night, but I did the assignments last week.
Right, because it does timestamp when you submit. So I put your initials and a question mark, and so I will just double check. All right.
Thank you.
You betcha. And we're a small class, so just make sure you stay ahead of the curve. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Nice class.
Yep. Night night. Night night. Time for a nap.